Hello and welcome back to the last session, session 4 of the Race Management for On-Water Volunteers RQ online training program. And in this one we're going to focus on the finish and what happens and what roles people have at the finish. So with the finish line, the finisher is responsible more than likely to set the finish line. And it's important to know where and how and in what direction it's going to be and how long it needs to be. So on an upwind finishing line, the line should be set at 90 degrees to the wind direction. So for instance, if we have a finish line that is above Mark 1 and we have the boat coming up here to finish and the wind's coming from that direction, then our mark needs to be set at 90 degrees to the wind direction. If we have a boat coming around a mark here and coming in this direction to the finish, it doesn't matter what the wind's doing. We set up our finish at 90 degrees to the direction from whence they are coming. So, like this. If the finish is at a gate, then the finish line becomes that gate. Okay? So that's essentially how we set up a finish line. How long should the finish line be? Well, this depends on the type of boats and the wind strength. Generally, for most dinghy fleets, it's about 50 to 60 metres in length, or a rule of thumb is about 10 boat lengths wide. However, depending on the boat and the wind strength and the angles in which they sail, that width may need to be extended. And perhaps the ability of the sailors might come into that equation as well. Now, if the start boat, as is not uncommon, is going to become the finish boat in another position, then perhaps they need to think about whether or not they need to take their pin with them to use as the finish pin. Now, the finish boat has to display some flags, and again there is information in the sailing instructions about what should be displayed. And these flags go up as the first boats are rounding the last substantial leg before the finish. So not in the example on the in the middle there where they're coming around Mark 4 and they have only a short little bit to go for the finish. It's the mark before that we put the flags up. Now, depending on what's in the sailing instructions, we may just need to put the blue flag up, and the blue flag denotes the finish line. Essentially what it does mean though is that the race committee boat is in position at the finish line. It may or may not be the flag described in the sailing instructions as constituting the finish line. That may be the orange flag, in which case both flags need to be displayed. Whichever flag is described in the sailing instructions as the finish line flag is the pole or the halyard from which you sight the line, and that is your finish line. Now, this finish line has to be set before the boats start that last leg to the finish. The sailing instructions will give you guidance on which side of the finish line the boat should be. Should it be on the starboard end or the port end? The sailing instructions will describe that. Check it. The first boat that crosses the finish line we traditionally give a sound signal to. We don't need, it's not imperative, but it is an indication to the other boats that the first boat has finished and they have some idea of how long they have got to finish in a time limit. It's not imperative either to give a signal for every other boat that finishes. It may be a courtesy, it may be an annoyance, or it may just get in the way of hearing what the caller and the recorders are all saying. So it's important to record every boat as it crosses the line in the order in which they cross it, And don't bother separating the classes out, because most finish or scoring programs can deal with a mixture of classes. You record every single boat that crosses your finish line and when they cross it, even if they come back and do it a second time. There may well be a good reason for that. So even if you know that someone's OCS, UFD, BFD, whatever at the start, you still record and note when they crossed your finish line. It may be that they'll be reinstated by a later protest, and if we don't know when they went across, we can't fix that. Also, if there's some DNFs or DNSs, or for whatever reason boats have broken things, they've been towed ashore, they've left the course for whatever reason, and we know, then we record that on that finish sheet as well. As much information as we have should be on that finish sheet. Important to let the start boat know that all the boats are finished, because they're waiting to start the next race in a lot of cases. And have a discussion with the race officer to determine whether or not you actually need times for every boat, or just the boats that you can get the times for. Obviously important to get the time of the first and the last boat, and whatever you can in between, regardless of whether the times are needed for handicaps or not. So the roles on the start boat are essentially the caller, the scribe, and a timer, particularly if it's a handicap race. So the caller calls the numbers out as boats are approaching and crossing the line, and they're usually also recording on a voice recorder of some description. So we have a digital record as well as a hard copy, a manual record. The scribe basically keeps that paper copy, and we may or may not have one or more scribes, and we may or may not have one or more finished teams, depending on the type of event. The timer essentially calls the finish time as the caller indicates that someone has crossed the line. And it's particularly important for handicap events to get that time down for every finisher. For non-handicap events, not so critical. For major events, ideally we have at least 2 independent recording teams. If the boat's big enough, we have one at the front, one at the back, one at the top, one at the bottom, one at the pin end. In each and every one of those places, or at least 2 places. And the idea here is we can only do a finish once. We can't redo a finish. So it's important to get as much information on that finish as we can, so we can stitch it all together at the end. You need to let the starter or the race officer, if they're on a separate boat, know when the first boat's crossed the line. That then helps them make some determinations about whether their course is long enough or short enough. And when the last boat's finished, that helps them understand how soon they can start the next race. On the last race of the day, the time of the last boat finishing triggers the protest time limit. So we need to get that information ashore. It may be from the finisher directly ashore, it may be through the race officer. That's something that you have a discussion about. But ashore we need to know when that last boat's finished so the protest time limits can be posted. As far as the caller goes, if you can't see the number on the boat because they're all bunched up, use whatever you can to try and identify that boat. Is it the closest boat, the boat in the middle, the one at the near the pin? Have they got a blue hull, a red hat, a yellow spinnaker, whatever? Anything you can think of or see that will help you distinguish that boat down the track. Even if there's nothing, they're all white sails, white boats, grey gear, lasers, just leave a blank. But do everything you can to get all of the numbers in a group as they're approaching the line. That will also help at a later stage. However, if you miss 1 or 2 or 3, don't sweat it, because as soon as you start focusing on the ones you've missed, there'll be another 10 that have crossed the line and you'll have an even bigger mess. So just leave it, move on, keep going. You just keep recording, keep tracking the ones you can. What happens if we miss them? We post the results as we have them as best we can, as soon as we can. And we will be told very quickly if we've missed someone. There's a process to put in a scoring inquiry. We can fix it later. But if you sweat that one that you've missed on a finished boat, sure as eggs, you'll make an even bigger mess. So as far as the writer, the scribe goes, often you don't have a chance to look up. You've got your head down and you're just focusing on what the caller's calling in terms of numbers and potentially the timer as well as far as time goes. Now if you miss something again or you have trouble hearing what it was they said, don't sweat it, just skip a line, move on. The other team may have got it, someone else scribing it'll be on the tape. We can get back to it and we can get it. As soon as you start sweating that small stuff, you'll have a bigger mess. So when we're recording times, if we need to, often the best way to do it is the timekeeper will be calling out, okay, it's now 1200, it's 12 hours, the minutes are 20 and the seconds are 34. And that's the first boat that crossed the line, say, for instance. And then the next one was 45, and then the next one was 50, and then we had the minutes are now 21, and the next boat's 10, the next one is 17, and so on. And then we get down to the hours are now 13, the minutes are 01, and the seconds are 02, and so on. So we don't have to write the hours and the minutes every time. We can just write the seconds and write the minutes as they change and then the hours as they change. The other thing to think about is when there's a group coming to the start, ideally the caller will try and identify the boat numbers in that group. So just get them down. Doesn't matter that they're not in the order that they're crossing the finish line. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, boat number 6, 7, 8, 9. We've got 2, 7, 5, 8. We've got 7, 9, 4, 2. We've got 1, 0, 8, 4. Just get the numbers down. As they cross the line, you might be going, okay, that one was first, this one was second, this one was third, this one was fourth, that one was fifth. Easy to identify on a finish sheet. If you start doing things like this, it starts getting really lovely and messy and no one will know what you meant. So just get the numbers and then put an indication beside them of the order in which they finished. Okay, so there are obviously a number of tools that someone who's going to be taking the job of a finisher needs to be able to use and understand. And obviously the first thing is a stopwatch. Helps to make sure that that's synced to GPS time. Really important. Everyone's on the course should have a clock, watch, whatever, synced to GPS time. And then you obviously may need a compass and an indication of where the wind's coming from. It can be just a very simple wind stick, because you may need to work out what 90 degrees to the wind coming from, to set a finish line that's 90 degrees to the wind at a top mark. You obviously need a voice recorder, and you need to know how to use it, how to replay your recording, and so on. You obviously need paperwork. Can't get away without paperwork. You need finish sheets. You need enough finish sheets for that day at least, if not more. And you need something to write on, a clipboard or something. Ideally you take out with you information about the number of boats or sailors that are entered or that are starting. And from the start boat you want to know also how many people actually went off on their start line and how many boats were on course side or BFD or UFD. The course tables may be of some use as well if you need to, for instance, set up on a little reach, or if you have to be in a particular place relative to the start boat. The finisher has the role of, or responsibility of, working with the skipper to anchor that finished boat and put it in the right spot. Now, a question: has that boat finished? You are the finisher, you are sighting across to this orange buoy here down the finish line, and you see this on your finish line. Well, the answer is yes. That boat finishes as soon as the first part of the hull, boat, crew or equipment in its normal position crosses the finish line according to the definition. And essentially for dinghies this is determined as the normal position. So that boat has finished, and they finished when that person's head, who was still attached to the boat, crossed the finish line. Now there's also been some discussion about whether or not a OCS UFD or BFD boat triggers the clock as far as the time limit goes if they are the first finisher. Now again, there's been some discussion at a fairly high level about this, and the World Sailing has a process to ask questions and provide, esteemed jury members provide answers, esteemed judges provide answers. Now there is some discussion because an answer was provided to this question which some people would suggest is not correct, because the answer was that they don't. However, if we look at Rule 35, which discusses how we time limits and how we score a race, it says if one boat sails the course as required by Rule 28 and finishes within the time limit, if any, then all boats that finish shall be scored, etc, etc, etc. Now Rule 28 talks about a boat shall start, sail the course described in the sailing instructions and finish. Now if they've crossed the finish line, they've certainly finished. What's the definition of start? Well, the definition of start is a boat starts when, having been entirely on the pre-start side of the starting line at or after her starting signal, etc, etc, etc. Now a boat that's OCS, UFD or BFD therefore hasn't complied with the definition of start, so therefore they shouldn't really trigger that time limit. However, we still note that they've crossed the line, we still note the time they cross the line, because it may be that they protest or request redress and are reinstated, and so we need to shift that time limit potentially. So finishing can be an interesting exercise, it can be a demanding exercise, but it's a really important exercise and usually relatively and really enjoyable. So that's it for the last session. Thank you for your attention.